Hi everyone, today is Shiva Asar Tammuz, the 17th day of Tammuz, a fast day for the Jewish people, commemorating 5 calamities in Jewish history. We are at day 291 of the war with Hamas since Simchas Torah. May Hashem and the zchut of our learning and all the good deeds that we are doing, may all the remaining hostages be returned safely to their families, and may no harm come to the brave soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces. In our superficial world, I try to get my students to think about some of the basic questions. And one of those questions is, I ask my students, how do you know you're Jewish? And I'm really curious to hear what they have to answer. But what's always never surprises me is their quizzled look on their faces, like, what kind of question is that? Of course I'm Jewish. And I go back and I say, how do you know? And eventually they tell me, well, my parents told me. And I say, well, how do you know they're telling you the truth? And we have this discussion about the importance of, we assume that our parents never lied to us. But then I say to them, how do they know they're Jewish? And that leads on to further questions. In this week's parsha, it's almost the same way. Parsha Pinchas, chapter 26, verse 5, God gives testimony that we are Jewish. How so? As we recount the Jewish families and the tribes of Israel, after the 24,000 people perished during the plague brought on by Bilam and Balak, God adds his name to the families. So for instance, in verse 5, which talks about the family of Ruvain, instead of calling it Bnei Ruvain Chanoch, the Torah says, Bnei Ruvain Chanoch Mishpachas HaChanochi. A Hey and a Yud are added to the name. A Hey at the beginning and a Yud at the end. That's God's signature name. God's name is spelled with a Yud and with a Hey. And Rashi clarifies that for us, bringing down a Yalkut Shimoni, a Midrash, to tell us that God is giving testimony. Since the Jews were somewhat predisposed to immorality, and since the Jews came from Egypt, where the Egyptians had control over the Jewish people's bodies, perhaps the Jewish people were involved in illicit relations with the Egyptians, and therefore the offspring of the Jewish people were not purely Jewish. And God says, no, I can give testimony. I am the all-knowing, powerful God, and I know that these are legitimate Jews. Pure lineage. Okay. That made me come to think for a moment. There's a sefer, a book called The Power of Aleinu. It's written by Rabbi Usher Wegbrate, based on the Abiduram, about the beautiful idea of Aleinu. We finish Aleinu, the prayer that we say on Yom Kippur, but every prayer, 3 times a day, we end off with Aleinu l'shabeach. We are told that Yeshua ben Nun wrote Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol. It is incumbent upon us to praise the master of the olam, of everything, Adon Olam. Aleinu, the first paragraph, begins with the letter Ayin and ends with the letter Dalid. The second paragraph also begins with an Ayin and ends with a Dalid, Eid, Eidut. Just like God gives witness and testimony in Parshas Pinchas that we are pure, we Jewish people give testimony, Eid, Ayin, Dalid, that God is the master of the world. And in order to be a good aid, how do you know that a person can be a proper witness? Well, if God gives testimony that we are good witnesses, that we are pure of lineage, then we can give testimony that He is the master of the world. And I remind my students as they leave davening, and we should remember that when we leave davening, we are to behave as witnesses that there is a God in the world. Our behavior should reflect that there's a Adon Olam. The world still points us out. We are the proxy of Hashem. We are Hashem's messengers, ambassadors, if you will. And we give testimony to God's presence in this world through our behavior, our actions, our speech. As we go through the 3 weeks, may they continue to get better and not worse, and that truly lead up to Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Instead of fasting, it should be a day of a moed, as called, a holiday, and we should see a final culmination of this difficult moment and period of time that we are in, to celebrate, to see God's presence felt in the world, l'saken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to prepare the world, to fix the world for Hashem's Malchut. If you like what you hear, please pass it on. Shabbat Shalom to all. And may you all have an easy